Okay, let's dive into an era of just incredible upheaval, a time that completely reshaped the world we live in today. We're talking about a period where the very ideas of power, freedom, and who gets to rule were totally turned on their head, not just in one country, but across an entire ocean. And the crazy thing is, people felt it coming. The writer Voltaire asked this question way back in 1772, years before the first shots were even fired in America. It just perfectly captures that electricity in the air, that sense that the old way of doing things was about to completely shatter.
Now, it's really easy to think of the revolutions in America, France, Haiti, and later on in Latin America as totally separate stories. But they really weren't. You have to see them as part of a much larger, interconnected chain reaction, a whirlwind of rebellion and new ideas that were literally bouncing back and forth across the Atlantic.
And at the absolute heart of all of it was this one powerful and frankly dangerous idea: popular sovereignty. I mean, think about it. For centuries, everybody just accepted that kings and queens had a divine right to rule. This idea flipped that completely upside down. It said power doesn't come from God, it comes from the people. And that, right there, was the intellectual ammunition needed to tear everything down and start over. So, where does this all kick off? Well, it begins with the first ripple, a revolution that was, in a lot of ways, surprisingly conservative. Here's the thing you have to understand about the American colonists. They weren't actually trying to create a brand new society from scratch. They were fighting to protect the rights and the self-government they believed they already had. In their minds, Britain was the one changing the rules of the game, and this revolution was all about preserving what they had. So, what lit the fuse? Well, it was a sudden shift in British policy. Britain needed to pay for its massive global wars, so it started slapping new taxes on colonies that had, for a very long time, pretty much run their own affairs. This move just smashed right into a colonial society that was already buzzing with these radical ideas about self-rule and Enlightenment freedom. So if the American Revolution was a ripple, the next one, well, that was a shockwave, a revolution that was way more violent, way more radical, and completely transformed society itself. This political cartoon just says it all, doesn't it? It perfectly captures the core conflict that fueled the French Revolution. See, this wasn't about some distant king across the ocean. This was an internal war against the very structure of French society. The Third Estate, that's basically all the common people, were literally carrying the nobility and the clergy on their backs. And the goal wasn't just independence. It was to completely flip this social order upside down. And that really gets to the fundamental difference here. America fought an external power, a distant king, to preserve what it already had. France fought itself to create something entirely new. The French weren't just looking for independence. They were trying to tear down their entire social structure, the whole shebang, and build a brand new society from the ground up based on these new ideals of reason and equality. And this drive for a total reset led to this incredibly violent phase we call the Terror. It was a perfect example of a revolution that began to devour its own children. In the name of protecting liberty, the Committee of Public Safety executed tens of thousands of people, from the king himself to just ordinary citizens, until finally its own leader, Robespierre, met the exact same fate. But that shockwave from France, well, it was about to become an absolute tidal wave in the Caribbean, where these revolutionary ideals were taken to their most logical and most explosive conclusion. Just try to wrap your head around these numbers for a second. In the French colony of Saint-Domingue, which was, by the way, the richest colony in the world, a brutal system of sugar and coffee production was built on the backs of 500,000 enslaved people. They were the engine of the entire economy and the overwhelming majority of the population. And sitting right on top of this powder keg was a tiny population of about 40,000 white colonists. And even they were fractured by these deep internal divisions between the super-rich plantation owners and the poor whites. It was just an incredibly unstable social pyramid waiting to collapse. So what happens when that promise of liberty, equality, and fraternity reaches an island like this? It means something profoundly different to the enslaved people there. It ignited a fire that would create the second independent republic in the Americas and the first non-European state to break away from Western colonialism. And look, this image, it shows you the brutal reality of that struggle. This wasn't some philosophical debate in a salon. This was a war for freedom. The very lowest order of society, people who were treated as property, rose up to become equal, free, and independent citizens, throwing off their colonizers through unimaginable violence. And the world felt this immediately. The Haitian Revolution became this incredibly powerful symbol. For the oppressed and enslaved, it was a beacon of hope. But for slave owners everywhere, the phrase, "Remember Haiti," became a warning, a reflection of their absolute deepest fears of what could happen if this rebellion spread.
So, why does any of this matter to us today? Because these revolutions didn't just create a few new nations, they unleashed these powerful new isms that would go on to define the entire modern world.
All right, echo number 1, abolitionism. For the very first time, a powerful consensus started to emerge that slavery just had to end. And this wasn't just because Enlightenment philosophy said it was morally wrong, it was also because violent resistance, especially what happened in Haiti, proved that slavery was politically unsustainable and just plain dangerous for the people in power.
Nationalism. Now, this is a bit ironic, right? When Napoleon's armies marched across Europe, spreading all these revolutionary ideas, they also sparked fierce resistance. And in fighting back, people began to define themselves not as subjects of some king, but as citizens of a nation. A German nation, a Spanish nation, all united by language and culture. This idea would completely redraw the map of the world. And for our third echo, feminism. I mean, once you start throwing around phrases like the rights of man, it doesn't take very long for someone to stand up and ask, and what about women? The language of universal rights gave women a powerful new weapon to challenge thousands of years of patriarchy and demand a real voice in their own society. And this wasn't just a philosophical idea for long. What started with a few incredibly brave voices like Mary Wollstonecraft grew into a real, organized transatlantic movement. From Seneca Falls in New York to London, women began demanding access to education, to professions, and of course, the right to vote. They turned a philosophical question into a mass political movement. So here's the big takeaway from all of this. These revolutions aren't really over. They kicked off a global debate about what liberty and equality truly mean. And, crucially, who gets to be included in the people. And that is the very same debate we are all still having, all over the world, right now.